Hello, good evening or good afternoon, and welcome to Liv's Precincts Episode 2, Undercover Agent Stormy. So this is the second episode of my Precincts show, and I would like to welcome you all, those of you who are here, and thanks for coming. Let's see, so I'm going to start again, as I did last week, with news. If anyone would care to jump in, there is the Antechamber voice channel in my Discord, so please feel free to hop in there and I will drag you in momentarily. So, let's start with some recent news here. This is from the American Historical Association. So there is a gentleman by the name of Xiyue Wang, who is a PhD student in history, and he has been in Iran for a while studying the history of Iran of the Qajar dynasty from 1789 to 1924. Obviously, sometime before the current administration or government of Iran. But unfortunately, he was put in jail for 10 years, beginning in August of 2016, apparently simply for studying the history of Iran. So the American Historical Association has called for his immediate release on the 14th, that is today, of September. The AHA sent a letter to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, expressing deep concern about the imprisonment of Xiyue Wang, a PhD student in the Princeton University Department of History, on groundless charges of espionage. And their letter goes into some detail about why they, who they are, and the largest independent organization of professional historians in the world, with approximately 12,500 members spanning the globe. The AHA promotes historical scholarship, which requires access to archives and other repositories of information about the past. Despite holding the proper research permit and visa to conduct archival research in Iran, Mr. Wang has been convicted of cooperating with foreign states against the Islamic Republic of Iran and collecting highly confidential articles for his doctoral dissertation, which concerns diplomatic relations of the Qajar dynasty, which ruled Iran from 1789 to 1924. Iranian authorities confiscated Mr. Wang's passport on the 21st of July 2016. On the 7th of August 2016, he was taken to Evin prison, where he remains to this day. In April of 2017, he was convicted of espionage based merely on his relationship with academic institutions in the United States. In August of 2017, the judiciary rejected his appeal. His health has suffered greatly during his imprisonment, and his wife and young child continue to suffer unnecessary anguish and anxiety. Any charges of espionage against Mr. Wang are groundless. He is a student at a private university and has no associations with any government. No evidence has appeared suggesting Mr. Wang was in Iran for any purpose except researching the diplomacy of the Qajar dynasty. The Islamic Republic of Iran is signatory to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which explicitly protects freedom of speech, thought, and opinion. Yet, in imprisoning a historian and infringing his academic freedom, the Islamic Republic of Iran has sanctioned a miscarriage of justice. The time is long past to right this wrong and release Mr. Wang. We join the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, the Middle East Studies Association, and Princeton University in calling for the immediate release of Mr. Wang. Sincerely, Mary Beth Norton, President of the AHA. So that's rather disturbing. I'm going to hop back in time just a little bit. This article was published, it says, over a year ago. I don't see an exact date, but it was published in Big Think And it says this may be responsible for the high suicide rate among white American men. And it goes into some detail about the two single greatest risk factors for suicide in the United States today are being white and male. This is according to the authors of Exploring Suicide Patterns, Motivations, and What Notes Reveal. Psychology professor Cheryl Meyer says hegemonic masculinity is what's killing these men. They try to live up to a social stereotype no one could measure up to. Not only that, their model doesn't square with today's world. And in 2015, two Princeton economists found that the death rate among white middle-aged men, rather than falling, like with most other groups, was instead rising. The mortality rate for working-class white men between the ages of 45 and 54 had been steadily rising since 1999. And it goes on for some several paragraphs, but it talks about, Robert D. Putnam, Harvard public policy professor, says this is part of a larger emerging pattern of evidence of the links between poverty, hopelessness, and health. Veterans are often one of the largest segments within this group. According to 2014 Veterans Affairs report, 20 veterans commit suicide each day, 65% of them age 50 or older. And of course, there's the slow suicide route that a large segment of the group has chosen, succumbing to things like alcohol, liver disease, or drug overdose. And it says what might be causing this. White men without a college degree have seen their employment prospects dwindle in the last few decades, mostly due to mechanization. Their mental health has withered as a result. In terms of economics, globalization and income inequality have worsened the problem as well. Though most economists agree mechanization is the largest cause. However, middle-aged black and Hispanic men at the same education level have also been impacted by these same economic forces, yet the suicide among these groups has not risen. Besides economic woes, some experts point to the heightened divorce rate among men in this age range. Whether married or single, women tend to open up to friends and family about their troubles and build a strong network of support, whereas men generally don't. If they open up at all, it's usually to their partner, but for the divorced or single, there is no such outlet. Now, there is a thing that is known among women as venting. When we vent, we're just it's basically just to let off steam. We don't necessarily want anyone coming to try to solve whatever it is we're venting about. We just want to let off the steam so that it doesn't, build up pressure within us and we explode as a result, right? This article goes on. It's rather interesting. I'm going to put links to all of these articles in the video description after I've gone through them. I'm going to take a look here into the live chat and see if anyone is talking. Hello. I see Code Anime, Leslie Maxwell, Code Anime, which is Hannah. Hi, Hannah. And, yeah, okay, so how is everybody doing? I hope everyone is alright. Any questions so far over the two articles I've been over so far? I'm going to give you a moment to catch up with what I've said due to the delay, and have a sip of my Mountain Blackberry fizzy sugar water. So it doesn't look like anyone has any questions or comments yet, and therefore I shall proceed. So in the Missoulian, which is apparently a Montana paper, there was Juanita Vero, Montana Conservation Voters Chair, recently did an opinion piece in the Missoulian on the 5th of September, in which she leveled some serious accusations against the Green Party. she insinuated that Green Party candidates would be, quote, bad for Montana's environment and bad for our democratic process, end quote. Now, if you recall, last week I told you about how the Montana Democratic Party has been trying to toss the Green Party candidates off the ballot in Montana. Rather strong indication of the anti-democratic nature of the Democratic Party, at least in Montana. In response to this article, this opinion piece, a gentleman by the name of Steve Kelly wrote a guest column in the Missoulian, and he said that this insinuation she had made was unsupportable. He goes on to say, I've been an environmental activist since the day I arrived in Montana from Colorado in the fall of 1974. I decided to run for the United States Senate on the Green Party ticket this year primarily because not one member of the Montana congressional delegation is doing nearly enough to protect our water, our fish and wildlife habitat, or our forests and wilderness. Ugly clear-cuts continue to scar our beautiful mountainsides. Yes, despite what you may have heard, the U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management are still clear-cutting public land. Bulldozers are busy punching new roads into what remains of our unroaded backcountry. Have you ever once heard U.S. Senator John Tester or House candidate Kathleen Williams decry these obscene immoral insults to nature's web of life? Not a lot of daylight separates Democrats from Republicans on forest protection issues. Not one of Montana's statewide Democrat or Republican congressional candidates support ecosystem protection for our remaining roadless areas by designating Wilderness Act protection, limiting development in wildlife linkage corridors, or defending aquatic ecosystems from pollution by expanding protection under the provisions of Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. The Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act, NREPA, H.R. 2135, Senate 936, protects all these public values and more. This bill includes specific language honoring all Native American treaty rights, something rarely defended or even discussed in the halls of Congress under two-party duopoly rule. NREPA already has strong core supporters in the House and Senate. I support an ecosystem approach as the wisest plan in Washington to protect our sacred public lands. Even though the state Supreme Court upheld the lower court order removing the Green Party from the 2018 ballot, this battle is far from over. Greens are in federal court fighting to get back on the ballot. To suggest that Green Party candidates won't fight as hard as Montana Democrats for our environment is ludicrous. It is true that some Green Party candidates are politically inexperienced. However, no Democrat in those contested races is more committed than Green candidates when it comes to fighting for clean air and water, wildlife, and wilderness, and moving Montana forward in the life and death battle to control unwanted carbon in our atmosphere. It's called green, not Democrat or Republican, energy, for a reason. The most sensible vote for Montana's environment is to vote green. Write in green candidates if the names are not printed on the ballot. Fight against corruption and voter suppression in every way you are able. Full disclosure, I have in the past enjoyed financial campaign support from Montana conservation voters. It seems I have changed, or MCV has. I am a stronger environmental candidate today than when I ran for the U.S. House in 2002. I will not receive MCV's endorsement this time around. We seem to be moving in opposite directions. Montana voters who really care about the environment are fully aware of the shortcomings of Wall Street-funded parties. We experience disappointment every day as we watch everything special about our great state slipping away. Special interests own both major parties. Ignore the spin. A vote for a Green Party candidate is a solid vote for the environment. The only wasted vote in the 2018 general election is a ballot cast for a big money Democrat or Republican. In reference to his comments about clear-cutting and scarring the mountainsides and so forth, and I've seen this happen quite a lot, and I actually did some I worked for a contractor who worked for the Forest Service on contract some time back. Goodness, it's been 30 years or more. And what we would do is we would go into these areas that had been clear cut by the, like say, these timber companies, and we would replant, but we would only replant pine trees. Now, what is not known by the general public is that when these companies go in and clear cut, they cut the pine trees down, which are for timber, and they bulldoze over the old growth hardwoods, the oak trees, the elms, the hawthorns, and all of these other trees. They just bulldoze them over, even the cedar. And some of these trees, of course, the wood from them would be rather more expensive if it were harvested and sold, but they don't care to do that. They just bulldoze those trees over and let them die, and then whenever you go back in to replant, you go back in and replant pine trees only. This is damaging the ecosystem. It is already, and has been for quite some time, the case that the gray squirrel is not found west of the Mississippi anymore. And it was a native to this area, but you don't find it here anymore except in like state parks and national parks. And a lot of people think, well, I saw a gray squirrel yesterday. No, you didn't. What you saw was a brindled squirrel. It's a type of red squirrel. That's the species name. Gray squirrel is a species. Red squirrel is a species. Now, there are some red squirrels who have brindled fur. That is, it's a mix of different colors of fur. So there's a little bit of black, a little bit of white, a little bit of gray, a little bit of red. And, from a distance or even maybe a little closer, they appear to be gray, but they are in fact gray. They are in fact red squirrels. So, yeah, they need acorns, and they need, walnuts and pecans and hickory nuts and things like that in order to live. And so if you bulldoze over all of these, hardwoods, well, then there you go. You've taken their food source from them, basically. So there's that. So I'm gonna continue on then. Wait, I see there is some conversation out in the chat, and I see that Hannah did retract a message about. I don't really know, Hannah, if I don't really know if guys just keep it bottled up inside or not, but there is a kind of distinction between the way that men and women deal with, frustrations and annoyances and so forth. Generally, and these are generalizations, of course, but generally women will experience some kind of annoyance or frustration or whatever at work or in their relationships or whatever, and they will basically just let off steam about it. And once the steam is gone, okay, everything's good, let's go on and move on. Men have a tendency, generally, again, generalization, to keep things kind of bottled up inside and then maybe later explode or let those things fester inside them and produce psychosomatic diseases and so forth. So I don't know. Again, these are generalizations. Oh, hi Vegematic, how are ya? I'm glad to see you here. And you are in my Discord, so if you'd like to hop in, there is an anti-chamber voice channel in the Discord. If you hop in there, I'll drag you into the actual streaming channel when I am done reading the news. I have just a few more articles to go through. Leslie Maxwell says the National Trust. That is, yeah, that's a UK thing. There's also the National Trust for Scotland. It does do things about conservation, not just with the environment, but also with historical, buildings and so forth. The National Trust for Scotland does take care of a lot of historical artifacts and structures and so forth. And I'm assuming that is the case in other countries, other nations or whatever in the UK. I know you are one nation state, but a country or a nation, it has to do with culture. Stoicism, Well, I'm not a big fan of Stoicism myself, but if you are, that's cool. Okay, all right, let me get back to these other articles. Okay, so speaking of the environment, in Truth Out, just quite recently, I think this was, yes, the 13th, so it was yesterday, there's an article called Trump Lights the Fuse on a Deadly Methane Bomb. And it says Trump's Interior Department is about to repeal restrictions on the venting and burning of methane that is created during drilling operations. The reasons why climate scientists don't sleep well at night can be condensed into one word: methane. The current methane situation within ongoing planet-wide climate change is already dire. In his ruinous quest to erase the legacy of his predecessor, Donald Trump intends to make matters even worse. This week, the Trump administration gave climate scientists and the rest of us even more reasons to toss and turn. According to multiple media reports, Trump's EPA is proposing to roll back Obama-era regulations for methane emissions created by oil and gas wells. Under Obama, methane leaks from drilling sites and pipelines were closely monitored and immediately dealt with. If Trump gets his way, those days are over. Not to be outdone by the EPA, Trump's Interior Department is about to repeal restrictions on the venting and burning of methane known as flaring that is created during drilling operations. As reported by Truth Out journalist Mike Ludwig, the Trump administration has been seeking to make these disastrous regulatory changes since the day they got the keys to the building. Now they are trying again. It goes on and on. It talks about weakening August proposals to weaken regulations on the carbon dioxide pollution that is released from vehicle tailpipes, undercut regulations meant to control the pollution from coal-fired power plants, and blah, blah, blah. And it says... the preponderance of methane in our atmosphere lubricates the rails for the nightmare runway freight train bearing down on us all. Carbon dioxide is dangerous enough, but methane puts it in deep shade when it comes to environmental damage. Even the EPA admits the release of methane is, generally speaking, a very bad thing. The agency's official proposal concedes the move will, quote, degrade air quality and adversely affect health and welfare, end quote. Alex Kirby for Climate News Network writes, quote, methane is reckoned to be at least 30 times more powerful than carbon dioxide at warming the Earth, with some estimates putting its potency much higher still, end quote. Methane emissions hasten the melting of the polar ice caps. Without the ice caps, the sun will warm the seas and kill virtually every living thing in them, but only after those seas have devoured every coastline on Earth. Global weather patterns will change dramatically and harshly. And it goes on a little bit further. I'm going to skip down just a little bit more. Oh, yes. We already live beneath a methane sword of Damocles. The Arctic and Siberian permafrost has billions of tons of methane trapped beneath it. That permafrost is melting right now because of the climate change we have already caused. The release of that methane is hastening the cycle in the same way an exploding bomb hastens shrapnel, and no one will be unharmed when the echo fades. Truth Out journalist Dar Jamail writes, quote, the most significant variable in the Permian mass extinction event, which occurred 250 million years ago and annihilated 90% of all the species on the planet, was methane hydrate. In the wake of that mass extinction event, less than 5% of the animal species in the seas lived, and less than 1/3 of the large land animal species made it. Nearly all the trees died, end quote. And then he goes on and he says, a study published in the prestigious journal Nature in 2013 July issue confirmed what climate scientist Natalia Shakova has been warning us about for years, that a 50 gigaton burp of methane from thawing Arctic permafrost beneath the East Siberian Sea is highly possible at any time. That would be the equivalent of at least 1,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide. For perspective, humans have released approximately 1,475 gigatons in total carbon dioxide since the year 1850. A gigaton is 1 billion? 1 trillion? Yeah, I don't know. Let me see. Yeah, 1 trillion tons. A gigaton is 1 trillion tons. So, 50 gigaton burp of methane from thawing Arctic permafrost beneath the East Siberian Sea, highly possible at any time. The article goes on with more with more information, but not for much longer. So I'm not going to read the rest of it. You know, I mean, a lot of people seem to think that this is all fun and games and nothing's really going to change and humans can't really affect our environment and so forth. So it's obviously not just what we're doing now in itself. It's also the fact that what we are doing now has the potential to increase the rate of methane release from the permafrost and from our drilling and so forth and so on. And that is just going to make things worse and worse and worse. I believe that projected, now I have to check this to be sure, but if I recall correctly, the projected estimates are that we need to get things under control by 2036, if I'm not mistaken, in order to avoid an irreversible change in our climate. I mean, of course, it would eventually straighten itself out, but eventually means like maybe several thousand or 100,000 years or something. So, I am unfortunately not an expert on that particular type of science. Nor am I'm not a scientist at all, but I do, you know, I do read and I study and I try to keep up with things. And as a Green Party member, I am very concerned about the environment. I have been interested in ecology since the 70s. In fact, I used to have one of those little lunch boxes that I took to school with me that had the ecology flag on it. And if you look on Amazon or eBay, you can probably find some of those. They're actually kind of cool looking. They're green plastic lunch boxes, and they had the ecology flag and the ecology symbol. And yeah, I was young at the time, very young. But anyway, going on. Let me check in the chat out here. Red squirrel, yes, red squirrels are cool little animals. Gray squirrels are as well. There's a place, I think it's in, well, it's in New England somewhere, where they have another species of squirrel. From what I understand, it's another species, and they're like black, like as black as like black denim jeans. And a friend of mine back some years ago told me about how he was walking around in a park up there, and one of them saw he was wearing black denim jeans, and the squirrel just came and crawled up his leg just above his knee and looked up at his face and started barking at him. You know, so squirrels have their little barking sound that they make. So that was a cool little story. I've never seen one of those squirrels myself, so I don't know about the so-called black squirrel. It may just be some kind of a variation of the gray squirrel, but I would probably look that up later on and see about that. I haven't thought about that story in quite some time. Anyway, so I'm going to move on. So at MSN, in their Law and Crime Law and Crime section. They have reported, as of yesterday, reports of widespread voter suppression in the New York State public Democratic primary. And as I've said before, if you let them get away with it in 2016, they're just going to do it again. And they did get away with it in 2016. They purged people from voter rolls and later came out and admitted that they did it, and nothing was done to them. They had no kind of punishment for that whatsoever. But this article says, on the day New York State Democrats selected their party's standard bearers for the upcoming midterm elections, voters are reporting numerous forms of procedural roadblocks, incorrect voting information, and disenfranchisement that many suggest rise to the level of voter suppression. In a series of tweets beginning mid-morning on Thursday, New York Magazine author Rebecca Traister detailed her own purge from Democratic Party voter rolls, despite the fact that she's voted from the same address for the past 4 years. Traister noted that she wasn't the only one experiencing such issues. And so from her Twitter account, she says, "So folks, if Cynthia Germain Zephyr or Eleanor loses by a single vote tonight, just wait for the affidavit ballots to come in. Seriously though, what the actual fuck?" Also worth noting, this was 8:30 and the poll watcher who helped me said I was the second person she'd spoken to who had this problem. Another woman who said she was an active, regular voter and not in the books. And this is exactly what happened in 2016. People who were regular voters, active voters, had been purged from the voter rolls for no apparent reason other than the possibility that they would be likely to support candidates the Democratic Party establishment didn't want to win the nomination. The Democratic Party in New York back in the 1800s had a political machine called Tammany Hall that was run by a fellow called Boss Tweed. I forget his actual name, but they called him Boss because he was the boss of the New York Democratic Party machine. And Boss Tweed, yeah. So that's something that, I mean, I think most of us in America have studied that in U.S. history, even in high school, to know about Tammany Hall and Boss Tweed. And apparently, Tammany Hall is alive and well, and it ain't just in New York anymore. I have occasionally joked that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is the reincarnation of Boss Tweed. But anyway, so I've seen quite a bit of this. There was an article, there are a couple of videos here and there that were done about this by other people. I think Tim Black had a video about it earlier today. And I'm pretty sure that Jimmy Dore talked about it a little bit yesterday or today as well. So, I mean, Jimmy did actually retweet me saying something about if you let them get away with it in 2016, they're going to do it again in 2018. And that was, 2 months ago or something. So, but anyway, this article goes on a little bit longer, and it talks about several other people, names purged from the Democratic Party's voter rolls. Yeah, it's pretty disturbing. Democratic National Committee member Nomiki Konst, who is a well-known Bernie supporter, used to work for the Young Turks until they fired her. And I'm not going to say what the reason was because I don't know, but, I think most of us who have watched the Young Turks in the past couple of years and are modern progressives are pretty aware of the fact that the Young Turks really went all in for Hillary as soon as the primary was over and the Democratic National Convention had happened, and only right at the end, shortly before the general election, did they finally allow Jill Stein to come on a couple of times and talk with her. But it was all for Hillary because we got to stop Trump. And I'm like, what the fuck do you want to stop Trump for? He's the same as every other president since Reagan moved into the White House in 1981. I mean, it doesn't matter if they've got an R by their name or a D by their name. They're pushing the same stuff. Neoliberalism on the economy, which is far-right corporatist economic policies. Neoconservatism in foreign policy, which is interventionist, imperialistic wars for profit. They're warmongers. And authoritarianism on the domestic front. So, I mean, they're a little bit different about what they want to be authoritarian about, but they're both authoritarian. And I mean, you can check their records. Don't just listen to their words. Watch what they do. That's important. Machiavelli pointed this out, some 400 or 500 years ago, writing in commentaries on the first 10 books of Titus Livius, that the majority of mankind is satisfied with appearances as though they were realities, and is more often moved by the things which seem than by the things which are. Rhetoric is a favorite tool of sophists and demagogues. It is an appeal to your emotions, to your passions, to your prejudices, to your patriotism, to your religious conceits, and so forth. It is an attempt to persuade you. It is an attempt to win a debate. Logic is an attempt to get at the truth. Dialectic is an attempt to understand and to get at meaning. So if you want to go beyond rhetoric and analyze rhetoric and see where it is illogical, where it's making use of logical fallacy, as it does so often. I mean, you have this, both of the two main parties use the argumentum ad metum frequently. It's always, vote for me or else you'll get that. And then they talk about that as if it's the worst fucking thing that could possibly ever happen to the country. The Republicans have been calling the Democrats socialists and communists for several decades. And the Democrats are in no way socialist, much less communist. The Democrats have been calling Republicans fascists for decades as well. And, they're both neoliberals, which, that's also extreme right-wing economics, but it's not quite the same thing as fascism. The difference between fascism and neoliberalism is primarily in terms of what happens in the end, and what the relationship exactly between state and corporate power is. In fascism, the state retains the upper hand and props up corporations, but only insofar as they are loyal to the state and promote the interests of the state. In neoliberalism, the state becomes the servant of the corporations, and if it were allowed to reach its logical conclusion, which it has never done so far, but if it were allowed to reach its natural logical conclusion, what would happen would be national governments would be replaced by multinational corporations. At some point in time, the corporations would feel comfortable to simply dispense with the facade because it would no longer be necessary, and they would simply, boom, here we are. We are now in charge, and we don't need these little government puppets anymore. We're the ones. If you have, back in the early 90s, I guess, say like 92, 93, 94, and maybe a little bit after that, there was a line of comics published by Marvel called Marvel 2099. And in Marvel 2099, it was set in the year 2099, and the world, there were no national governments anymore. Everything was run by multinational corporations, and it was a very interesting and dystopian kind of future view. There was my favorite title in that line was Doom 2099, and it was about a guy who believed that he was Victor Von Doom, Dr. Doom, but was in fact, I forget now exactly what the deal was, and I don't want to spoiler it for you in case any of you haven't read it, but he wasn't actually Dr. Doom. He was like a clone or someone who had been brainwashed to believe that he was Victor Von Doom or whatever. I don't remember exactly now because it's been years, 25 years or so. But anyway, yeah, it was a very interesting little exploration of what might happen. So anyway, I'm gonna go on. I mean, I'm gonna put these links into the video description here in a bit. So I mean, if you want to check back later after the stream is over, and read some of these articles for yourself, because I'm not reading everything, of course, out of the articles. All right, so I'm gonna move on to the next article. This is from The Hill, and it says that Sanders' allies expect him to make a second White House bid. Allies to Bernie Sanders say the independent senator from Vermont is increasingly likely to make a second bid for the White House in 2020, once again as a Democrat. And so there are several people talking about this. Chairman of Our Revolution says he expects him to run. Probably the most popular elected official, Jeff Weaver, says Sanders is being very thoughtful about whether he enters the race, very focused on the question of beating Trump and putting a Democrat in the White House, and if he runs, it's because he thinks he's the one to do it. And let's see now. Yeah, there are a few others who talk about this from the other side, the Clintonite wing of the Democratic Party, and have their opinions about it and so forth. My opinion about it is that if Bernie Sanders had had enough faith in the movement he started in 2016, he could have run as an independent. He could have run as a Green Party candidate, anything. He could have run, he could have started his own political party, and he would have very well had a very good chance of winning, even in spite of that, which would have been, a realization, an actualization of the revolution, the political revolution that he had been talking about for so long. So, I mean, I don't know that he's still got that much support. A lot of his former supporters don't trust him because of how he has kind of carried water for the Democratic Party ever since, how he has promoted the Russiagate narrative, his being triggered over Donald Trump. Trump is coarse, he is rude, he is unpolished, he's discourteous. Lyndon Johnson was too. But apart from that kind of very, very rough around the edges aspect of Trump, what he's doing isn't really that different from what's been being done for the past 40 years. And it's really quite shocking to me to see how people are just hysterical over him. I mean, he's not a good president by any means, but neither was Obama, neither was W, neither was Slick Willie, neither was George Bush the Elder, neither was Reagan. Carter wasn't that good of a president, but he's better than anyone since, and that's a pretty low bar, as I've said before. I mean, even Nixon in some ways was better than anyone since Reagan moved into the White House. Nixon at least did some leftist things. He instituted wage and price controls, put price controls on the petroleum industry, kept the price of gasoline down, and had even suggested a universal health care at one point during his term in office. Now, Nixon was a very authoritarian president. He was a warmonger. I mean, he certainly had his flaws, and there's the whole Watergate affair as well. But compared to some of the shit we've had since Reagan got elected president, yeah, I'd rather have Nixon than Trump or Clinton or Bush or Obama or Reagan. Yeah. And that's not saying that I want Nixon either, obviously. But yeah, comparatively speaking, that just, I think, will help you understand exactly how little I think of any president who's occupied the office since January of 1981. In other news, now this is being reported on both Kyle Kalinski's YouTube channel, Secular Talk, and RT Russia Today. Syrian state YouTube channels have been terminated amid fears of a looming false flag chemical attack, just as the Syrian government is trying to move into Idlib, which is, if I understand correctly, the final area in the main part of Syria that is controlled by so-called rebel forces. Rebel forces, I should point out, which have been financed by the Pentagon and or the CIA. At one point in time, the CIA was funding one group of rebels and the Pentagon was funding another group of rebels in Syria, and they were fighting each other. So, instead of fighting the government. So, you know, so it says here in in RT's article, a number of Syrian state and media-linked YouTube accounts have gone dark as the battle for Idlib looms amid Russia's warnings of an imminent false flag chemical attack and Western preparations for retaliatory strikes. There have been several articles come out over the past week talking about how either the U.S. or the U.K. is preparing to launch another gas attack in Syria and claim that the Syrian government did it. The Russian government has said this, and again, you know, this is the Russian government, so take it with however many grains of salt you want, but it wouldn't be out of the ordinary, certainly not something to not put past our government, because they've done shit like this before. I mean, the Gulf of Tonkin thing that got us into Vietnam was not real. The weapons of mass destruction thing, again, that was not an intelligence failure. That was a fucking lie, people. Don't fall for this. The intelligence failure, the intelligence mistake. They keep on using all these excuses. Well, we just had bad intel. No, you didn't fucking have bad intel. You lied, motherfuckers. You fucking lied. Because you wanted the war. Because military-industrial complex. Profit, profit, profit. And that's the way it always has been. I mean, we can go back. You know, like I said, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, that was complete bullshit. That was invented by the intelligence agency to get us into the Vietnam War. There have been numerous examples throughout history. I mean, if you go back far enough, you've got the Lusitania. The Lusitania was a British ship in British waters off the coast of Ireland, which at the time was still part of the United Kingdom. It was flying a British flag. It had mountings for guns, although there were no guns mounted at the time, and it was in fact carrying illegal arms or munitions or something, which has been discovered since then by archaeologists diving down and, you know, examining the wreckage of the ship. The Imperial German Embassy in Washington had issued a warning next to all of the ads for the cruise, saying, look, a state of war exists between Great Britain and her allies and Germany and her allies, and we've already begun unrestricted submarine warfare. Any ship in British waters flying a British flag, blah, 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 can and will be sunk. So if you get on this boat, you're taking your life in your own hands, and don't blame us because we warned you. So, I mean, 2 years later, after he ran on the campaign slogan, "He kept us out of war," Woodrow Wilson used the Lusitania as an excuse to get the United States into war. And there were reasons for that based on greed. Again, if you read back into the late 1800s, early 1900s about the industrialists of the time, the wealthy capitalists, J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, all of these, the Carnegie, Andrew J. Carnegie, and these other people who were involved in Wall Street and oil and industry and banking and so forth. Yeah, they were very, very much interested in going to war with Germany because they were already violating the Neutrality Act. They were already selling arms and ammunition to the British against American law at the time. And if we went to war then with Germany, then we would be able to, they would be able to, legally sell these items, right? Yeah, Nixon was a progressive compared to, if you look back at the 1956 Republican Party platform and compare it with the 2016 Democratic Party platform, which people were saying was the most progressive party platform in the history of the Democratic Party, oh my God, I don't, if that were true, it just shows how very sad the Democratic Party has been. And I don't believe it was true, but if you compare the 2016 Democratic Party platform to the 1956 Republican Party platform, there's a clear difference in terms of who was more progressive, and it was the Republicans in 1956, not the Democrats in 2016. So there is quite a bit of interesting history. When the first Progressive Party was founded in 1912, the person who founded it was Teddy Roosevelt, and he was a Republican before he founded the Progressive Party. After that party lost in 2012 and again in 1912 and again in 1916, the majority of its members just kind of filtered back into the Republican Party. The Progressive Party did hold on for a few more years. I think it finally died out in 1920. But then there was another Progressive Party that was started in 1924 by Robert M. La Follette Sr., and he ran for president that year. There was, in 1948, Henry Wallace started another Progressive Party, and he ran for president that year. He had been the second vice president under Franklin Roosevelt. FDR's first vice president was a conservative Democrat from the South. And he served 2 terms as vice president, beginning in 1933 and going up until the end of 1940. By 1936, he had broken with FDR completely over the New Deal, because he was, a right-wing Democrat. And so many people have conflated the Democratic Party with the left. The Democratic Party has never been a leftist party. Never. There has never been a leftist elected president in this country from either party. FDR was the closest that they came, and even he was a centrist. He was a little to the left of the perfect center, but, all things considered, he was essentially a social democrat, and social democracy is an economic system, an economic philosophy that is a mixed economy. It takes a little bit of socialism and a little bit of capitalism and mixes them together. Now, depending on the relative amount of socialism and capitalism, a social democrat may be a little bit to the left of center, that is, if they have more socialism or want more socialism than capitalism, or they may be a little bit to the right of center, that is, if they want more capitalism than socialism. But yeah, it's a centrist thing, and that's essentially what the welfare state is. It's a social democracy. Eisenhower was a good guy. He was pro-union, he was pro-social security, all kinds of nifty stuff. But even so, he was not a leftist either. But now Henry Wallace was, and Henry Wallace, after FDR's first vice president broke with him completely in 1936, it was about that same time that Henry Wallace, who had been the Secretary of Agriculture under FDR since 1933, changed parties from Republican to Democrat. And Wallace was a progressive. He'd been a progressive for quite some time. And so when FDR chose to run for his third term in 1940, he wanted Henry Wallace to be his vice president. And the Democratic establishment said, no fucking way, man. And FDR said, well, okay, then I just won't run for re-election. So they said, oh, wait, you can have him, you can have him. So then we had the most progressive, most left-wing vice president we've ever had from 1941 to 1945. In 1944, Roosevelt was ill, and ill enough that he didn't have the strength to fight the Democratic Party establishment. So when they said, no, you can't have Wallace as your vice president again, he didn't have the strength to fight them. So they pushed Truman on him. Wallace was then, in spite of the Democratic Party establishment's wishes, FDR then said, okay, well, if I can't have him as my vice president, I'm going to make him Secretary of Commerce, and fuck you. So that's what happened. Now then, of course, FDR died shortly after winning his 4th term, and Truman succeeded him as president, and he kept Wallace on as his Secretary of Commerce until 1946, at which point in time the differences between the two had become rather pronounced, with Wallace advocating for more leftist policies and Truman wanting to undo the New Deal, with Wallace wanting to advocate for peace and Truman promoting the Cold War and enmity with the Soviet Union. Now, Wallace had been to the Soviet Union and taken a tour under the, you know, I mean, it was a guided tour, right? So, I mean, they showed him what they wanted him to see. And it was basically a presentation, a whitewashing of what things were really like. So when he saw a gulag, it wasn't the real gulag. It was kind of a dressed up, prettified version of a gulag, where he thought that the people that were there were, you know, doing voluntary work and so forth, and that was obviously not the case. Anyway, when he was fired by Truman in 1946, he then went on to become the the editor-in-chief of the New Republic, which was a magazine founded in 1913 by the original progressives. Now, Wallace himself was an original progressive, but from 1946 through 1953 or so, he became the father of modern progressivism. So modern progressivism dates from the end of World War II. And it has actual connection with the historical progressive movement. Wallace even talked about how progressives were the heirs of the Roosevelt tradition, going back through FDR, back to Teddy Roosevelt, and that was what progressivism was about. Anyway, I've talked about this at length several times on this channel and in the Progressive Flame, my publication, where I've even written a modern progressive manifesto. So anyway, there is that. I'm going to go ahead and have a look here. Oh yeah, let me say he went ahead and ran for president in 1948. He was endorsed by the Communist Party of the United States and did not, reject their endorsement. So a lot of people took that very badly because, at the time we were in the Cold War, the beginnings of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and people didn't trust the communists and so forth, and it wouldn't be too much longer before we had the McCarthy Red Scare. But by 1953, Wallace had come to understand that he had been presented with an inaccurate picture of what was going on in the Soviet Union under Stalin. In 1952, he talked with several people who had left the Soviet Union, at least one of whom had been in a gulag and was able to tell Wallace exactly what the gulags really were. And so Wallace did publish an article called Where I Was Wrong. And he apologized and he talked, but, he was still in favor of a more peaceful relationship with the Soviet Union instead of the Cold War that Truman had promoted. So from 1952 or 53 onwards, modern progressives have tended to still be leftists on economics, but not usually Marxists, some other type of socialist. And there are many kinds of socialism, some of which existed before Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels came on the scene, as can be evidenced by checking their condemnation of already extant types of socialism at the time. And of course, there have been other forms of socialism which have come into existence since then, including democratic socialism and cooperative commonwealth. Now, I myself am a supporter of cooperative commonwealth eco-socialism, about which I've talked to some extent here in the past. I'm going to go ahead and look back at this article about Syrian, So, on Saturday afternoon, the channels belonging to the Syrian presidency, the country's Ministry of Defense, and Sana News all showed a message saying this account has been terminated due to a legal complaint, or this account has been terminated for a violation of YouTube's terms of service. The Damascus-based Sana TV's channel on YouTube also appeared to be taken down with a message reading, "This page isn't available. Sorry about that. Try searching for something else." So YouTube shut down all pro-Syrian channels, including Sama TV, the Syrian Ministry of Defense, Sana News Agency, the Syrian Presidency. While YouTube has yet to issue any comment on the matter, it appears that the Syrian channels went offline sometime on Saturday morning, just as General Joseph Dunford warned that the Pentagon is preparing and keeping Donald Trump informed about, quote, military options, end quote, for retaliation in case, quote, chemical weapons are used, end quote, in Syria. The U.S. has made it abundantly clear that it is ready to attack Syria should chemical weapons come into play in the government's operation to clear the remaining pockets of jihadist resistance in Idlib. Moscow believes that terrorists holed up in Idlib will try to stage a false flag attack to frame Damascus and justify further airstrikes against Syria. It has warned the U.S. against escalating the situation in the war-torn country. On Saturday, the Russian military said it had obtained irrefutable data that terrorist groups including Jabal al-Nusra and the infamous White Helmets had already met in Idlib province and plotted the final scenarios for a false flag chemical attack in the cities of Jisr al-Shugur, Sirakab, Taftanaz, and Sarmin. The U.S. and its allies have repeatedly stressed their readiness to strike Syria if any attack takes place, ignoring all of Russia's warnings. In late August, American forces deployed missile destroyer USS Ross to the Mediterranean and USS The Sullivans to the Persian Gulf. The preparation of U.S. military forces was condemned by Russia, with its defense ministry describing the move as, quote, the latest evidence of the U.S. intention, end quote, to take advantage of a false flag attack. And it goes on with several tweets quoted from various people. And again, I will include all of these in the video description, so if you want to check back after the stream is over, or I might be able to get it done before the stream finishes, but either way, it will be here. I'm going to check here. I think Union Aerospace is in the waiting room here, the antechamber, so I'm going to drag him in. Hello, hello.
Well, hello there. What's up?
Hey there. Not much.
Hey.
I've just been doing the news, and so we've got almost an hour left before we shut down. Richard Wolff is interesting. I agree with quite a lot of what he has to say about cooperatives. I myself am not a Marxist, but yeah, I do like his talking about cooperatives. They are very important, and that is exactly what we need. So what's been going on with you?
Well, besides of starting college right now, this week exactly, well, nothing much. apart from their craziness we're having here because Article 13 has been fucking approved. So I hate Union even more.
Yep, I saw that.
But a bunch of senile fucks who think that they know how the internet works.
Doesn't that still have to go through another round of voting?
Yeah, but at this point, it'll pass. We already know where the wind is blowing, so... Like, call me a defeatist if you want, but so far, all of our efforts over here have been for naught, so...
Well, I'm in favor of burning down EU Parliament, but that's just me.
I mean, listen, if it were up to me, I think I'd be glad to fucking burn Brussels down entirely. With all of the European Parliament with it. The thing is, the European Parliament is basically the dumpster ground of unwanted politicians for each of the nation states of the European Union. So you can imagine that it's not going to be looking very good, you know. Like, it's just fucking dreadful what's going on over here. And I discovered that most of the parties who voted for the article were ironically left-wing.
Gotta censor them Nazis, yo.
Gotta censor them Nazis. Yeah, I mean, fucking Pep is gonna fucking ruin their lives, apparently.
Oh, well, you know, in relation to that, there was another piece of news, and I probably should have included it in my news reading. There is a more or less progressive, more or less leftist media outlet in the United States called Think Progress. And they just recently got censored by Facebook, and this is after they basically fluffed Facebook for you know, coming down on so-called conservative accounts on Facebook. So, I mean, now that the issue is on the other foot, of course, they're going to be probably crying foul. In fact, they did, and they're now trying to claim that Facebook has a conservative bias, which is, of course, nonsense, right?
I mean, Facebook is everything but a conservative bias, considering what's been going on lately.
Well, it's basically neoliberal, I think. I mean, what's his Mark Zuckerberg? Yeah, he is. He's basically an establishment Democrat. He's a Democratic Party loyalist, and that's not exactly leftist. It's not even centrist anymore. I mean, the Democrats were very centrist from Truman through Carter inclusive, but ever since Clinton got in, they've been right-wing. And it's arguable whether they are more right-wing or less right-wing than the Republican Party, but yeah, they're both pretty far right.
I'd say they're more because they keep getting all the Republicans' wet dreams put into law.
Yeah, that is the case because you don't expect it from them, and they get away with shit that you wouldn't expect them to be able to do, right?
I mean, yeah, you're fucking right, because fucking what a dumpster fire this has been, and to be honest, it's not even the end of it.
Yeah, so there is one more vote, right?
There is one more vote, but to be honest, I don't even. I don't fucking care anymore. It's just that's how defeated I feel. And not only that, we see a lot of the fucking ship posters from the United States laughing at us because of it. Which fucking sends me into some depressive spiral even more. But it also enrages me when they say "fuck you, you cucks, you voted these people in," and like, no, we fucking didn't.
Yeah, you didn't.
We didn't vote people in. We don't have the option to vote in to begin with.
These people that propose new legislation in the EU are appointed. They are not elected. So, I mean, there's that thing that has to be considered, and that's one of the reasons why there is a leftist case for Brexit. I mean, a lot of people who are leftist are very upset about Brexit, and they keep trying to claim that it was all right-wingers and xenophobes and racists and blah, blah, blah. No, there are, in fact, and even The Guardian published several articles before the referendum making a leftist case for Brexit. Now, the vast majority of their articles were pro-Remain, but they did at least publish a few articles saying, yeah, this isn't necessarily a bad idea, and there is a leftist, there is a leftist case for supporting Brexit. So, I mean, there is that.
Yeah, the thing when I see that, I'm like, I cannot wait for this to be renamed to the Union of Socialist Soviet European Republics,
There's a joke about how the, you may have seen it, it's a meme, it shows, the amazing original, and it shows like a map of Europe, and it shows the Kingdom of Prussia, and then it says, the sequel, or the OK sequel or something like that, and it shows the German Empire, and then it shows, I forget exactly what it calls it, but it was something like the reboot that disappointed everyone, and it shows Nazi Germany, and then it says something, I forget what it calls the next one, the disappointing fourth movie or whatever, which is, East and West Germany divided, and then it says something about the next move, and it shows the EU centered on Germany. There's another meme that shows a map of Nazi Germany, and then under it is a map of the EU, and there's a question asked. It says, hey, can I copy your homework, being asked by the EU to Nazi Germany, and Nazi Germany says, yeah, just change it a little bit so that they can't tell that you ripped it off from me. And so what you have is the maps are almost identical. There's just a few countries that are different, like, Switzerland is not there in both cases, but, instead of taking over Norway, they've got Finland, right? And there are a few other countries that were conquered by the Nazis that weren't conquered, that aren't part of the EU, and vice versa. So, I mean, like Spain was supposedly its own country at the time, even though it was very fascist, right? And now it's part of the EU. So, I mean, that's kind of a funny little meme.
It's more, it ceases to be funny when you see how things are going over here. So
yeah,
it ceases to be funny, and it becomes almost how would you call it? Foreshadowing. It almost seems foreshadowing, because in the end, between the whole thing of the migrants, because apparently Germany wants to transfer their migrants to us over here in Spain.
Oh, goody.
That's one rumor, that apparently there was some meetings between Pedro Sanchez and the German Prime Minister, Angela Merkel, in which apparently we're gonna have an influx of refugees coming here. And if I were him, I'd be like, fuck no, you shat the bed, Germany, now you clean up. I'd say that to her face, like, you fucking shat the bed when you did this, because if you transfer one single refugee to my borders, I'm closing them. Like, I'm really sorry, but like, we still have not gotten out of the economic crisis over here. Like, remember the 2008 crisis with Lehman Brothers? It's still going over here. Still going. We have not gotten out. And now fucking Germany wants to transfer their refugees to here? Well, no, fuck you kindly, will you? Fuck you kindly, and you're gonna give them the housing, because you were the one who were like, oh, let's open the borders without doing any regulation checks. What could possibly go wrong? Fucking hell, you fucking Germans are all fucking fascists, except for that thing. Except for that thing, you had to be ultra-liberals according to this thing.
And I wish that they had someone like Willy Brandt in as their Bundeskanzler again. He was the best chancellor after World War II. He was the best post-war chancellor of Germany. Willy Brandt. He was a social democrat back in the 60s, I guess, late 50s maybe. I don't know. Certainly in the 60s. And then he was succeeded, I guess, by Helmut Schmidt, who bungled a lot of, the Rote Armee Fraktion, the RAF, sometimes called Baader-Meinhof Complex. Are you familiar with that terrorist organization?
There was a whole movie about it too. So
Yeah.
I'm familiar with them.
So I mean, his dealings with them were shit. Basically, he came down. Basically, he what he did was justify their claims that West German government was still fascist. And I mean, they were obviously crazy people, but the way the government dealt with them under Helmut Schmidt only gave them, more of their victim complex shit that they could use to recruit gullible people.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, yeah, I think both of them shat the bed. Both the government and the fucking Baader-Meinhof complex.
Yeah.
Like, good fucking riddance to the Baader-Meinhof complex, but also fuck you, Germany, for doing this kind of thing.
Then they got Helmut Kohl as the next guy, and he was Christian Democratic Union. He was real buddy with Ronald Reagan and those guys. So I mean, he was he was a more of a right-wing conservative whatever type of chancellor. And I don't know. I think there was someone else after him, but I forget now. But anyway, then you have Angela Merkel, who is I've been told like. Helmut Kohl's protege.
No, well, there's also rumors that apparently half of the current German government is from East Germany, and as good East Germans, most of them apparently worked with the Stasi. So the actual German government being authoritarian, I'm not really surprised anymore. Because to the East German, the Soviets told them they were as much victims of Hitler as anyone else. Why do you think most of the neo-Nazi gangs and such come from East Germany?
Yeah.
There is a reason why most of the neo-Nazi gangs in Germany come from the East. They had not shared the collective guilt that had been imposed upon the entire German people, Like, the German guilt is still strong today. It needs to be reminded on them by our good old pal, the USA and company, in order to apparently not fucking provoke another Fourth Reich.
So there was a video, I think, done a while back that was like a guest video on Sargon of Akkad's channel. It was a guest video done by Crowd and Tune. I guess it was done maybe 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and it was talking about this German guilt thing, and it was quite an interesting video. If you can look that up and take a look at it. It's pretty interesting to listen to Kraut talk about that situation.
I'd love to take a look at that, but you gotta remember one thing. Even with the German guild, I'm sorry about what I'm gonna say about this, but the common German has such a superiority complex that hasn't left ever since the times of fucking Wilhelm II.
Hey, now I like Billy II.
I mean, Wilhelm II, the fucking Kaiser who went dressed up as if he were a fucking Tyrolese. Like he were from fucking Tyrol, Like, oh, there's a fucking war going on in which millions of my people are dying in the trenches. Might as well go hunting. Might as well go hunting,
Yeah, well, that was what the German aristocracy did, man. They went hunting. That was one of the things about Manfred von Richthofen and the Red Baron. Well, the reason that he called his squadron the Hunters was because as a child, as a young man growing up in Silesia, he went hunting, boar hunting. They would go hunt wild boar in the woods there.
Well, to the credit of von Richthofen, at least he fought. At
Yeah.
least he fought, and he served in the war. The fucking Kaiser and his cronies, not so much, though. Then again, it's like the entire German aristocracy went fucking bananas with the war itself.
Did you ever watch the television show Hogan's Heroes?
Hogan's Heroes, not the TV show. I think there's a film and then there's a TV show.
I don't know if there was
'Cause
a
I never
movie
heard
made of it, but it was a television sitcom-y 30-minute show that ran for, I think it started in 1966 maybe, and went until 1970, maybe a little bit after. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up. It was a very funny show. The premise was Colonel Hogan was a U.S. Army Air Corps colonel, for full bird colonel, and he was a prisoner of war in this Luftstalag in Germany. And actually, he and his guys were running an underground operation out of the POW camp. So they had these tunnels and shit, and they had all these uniforms. They had a tailor that could make uniforms for them. They could, go out and pretend to be Germans and go, engage in espionage, blow up trains and depots and rail stations, and sabotage Nazi jet plane programs and all kinds of. It was just crazy stuff. They would help people escape from other POW camps and get back to Allied lines and stuff like that. But there was one episode. Now the camp commandant, Wilhelm Klink, was a bungling schlemiel basically, and easily victimized, easily taken advantage of, very egotistical, and Hogan would often kind of play on his ego to get away with some of the stuff that he pulled. It's not, obviously it's not realistic, but because if they had tried anything like that in reality, it would have everybody would have died.
He would have been executed on the spot.
Yeah. But it was it was a sitcom. But there was the chief of the sergeant of the guard or whatever. The chief sergeant of the guards was Hans Schultz, and there was a point in time when Schultz was hanging out in the barracks with the prisoners, and he said, "Oh, things were so much better when we had a Kaiser." And then he realized what he said. He put his hand over his mouth and he goes, "Wait, what did I say? I didn't." And Hogan goes, "That's all right, Schultz. You're right."
The thing. Oh yeah, I should really take a look at it.
Yeah, it's a hilarious show. I mean, it's a bit dated. It was in the 60s and 70s, but yeah, it's still pretty funny, I think.
The thing is, with all the things that happened over, it's how would I call it? It was basically a shit show, and then again, most of current World War II media is a bit how do you call it? It's growing a bit scarce. So far I know, because fucking overabundance of World War II games killed the genre.
Yeah.
I mean, when we were complaining about the Call of Duty, and fucking modern advanced warfare and shit, we were complaining that there were too many World War II games, And then we made the comeback to World War II recently, and I'm not sure if you heard about the things that have been going on with Battlefield 5 lately.
Oh yeah.
Let me tell you, you fucked it up when you were 85% behind Call of Duty. You fucked it up when fucking Patrick Sutherland left the company with his tail between his legs. Well, with his tail between his legs and a 22 million bonus. I mean, let's just face it. He was smart. He was smart, even if he contributed to the dumpster fire to begin with. Because I don't think his 13-year-old daughter is that woke, if you know what I mean by that expression. I don't think his 13-year-old daughter would fucking care about the whole thing going on with Battlefield 5 just because she was playing Fortnite. Like,
Yeah.
I don't fucking think it. You know what? You know why I think it? Because as a fucking 13-year-old myself, I was not busy with politics. I was not busy with. I was not busy being woke. I was busy being a kid.
Right.
Busy being a kid. That's about it.
I mean, there are precocious children, but in all honesty, I kind of was myself, but in all honesty, it's not just a matter of being intelligent and interested in stuff. There's also the question of life experience, and 13-year-old kids don't have it. I'm sorry.
Exactly. Like, when I saw fucking Patrick Sutherland shoving her daughter into the conversation, I couldn't help but say, "You hopeless liar." Because why the fuck are you lying, dude? Say it's your fucking opinion, not the ones of your 13-year-old daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Then the dumpster fire is already complete anyway, so no matter what are they gonna do, the dumpster fire is already finished. It's gearing out to be the flop of the year, I think. I'm gonna predict that not even the hardcore fans of Battlefield are gonna save this game. Not even that, because I've checked the beta, saw it through several videos and such, and let me tell ya, casualized? That's an understatement. That's an understatement, what they did with Battlefield 5.
So there
For example,
a lot of monetized stuff?
No, not yet, because it's a beta.
Right.
I mean, you're not gonna monetize your own beta, right?
Right.
But for example, you cannot distinguish anymore who the fuck is who, you know what I mean?
Mm.
Uniforms. What the fuck is that? What the fuck is uniforms? In fucking World War II, everyone was going around with fucking cricket bats and katanas. I mean, like, can you imagine them running around with fucking cricket bats, katanas, and fucking beanies?
Goodness gracious.